November 23, 1985, 3 militants seized a Boeing 737 in what, just over 24 hours later, became one of the deadliest hijacking incidents in history. However, what makes this hijacking so uniquely horrifying is what happened when rescuers turned a bad situation into a catastrophic loss of life. I was surprised when researching this video that not many people have actually covered the incident on YouTube, so I decided to do my own version of the EgyptAir Flight 648 hijacking. So let's begin. EgyptAir was the first ever Middle Eastern airline, founded in 1932, and was the 7th airline to join the International Air Transport Association. It also unfortunately has a nearly equally long history of getting hijacked. The Aviation Safety Network reports the company has been hijacked 8 times, with the most recent being in 2016. The worst of these was Flight 648. At around 9 PM local time at Athens International Airport, Flight 648 took off heading towards Cairo International Airport, carrying 92 passengers and 6 flight crew. However, unknown to anyone aboard, 3 of these passengers were militants belonging to a group called the Abu Nidal Organization, armed with handguns and grenades. This attack took place over a decade prior to the 9/11 attacks, so airline security in general was much less stringent than modern day standards, but the international airport in Athens was also known as being a particularly lax airport on security, so the militants got their weapons aboard without much difficulty at all. After the plane took off, just 10 to 20 minutes into the flight, lead hijacker Salam Chakore and his 2 accomplices Omar Rezaq and Bu Said stood up and pulled out their weapons. Rezaq stormed into the cockpit and forced Captain Hani Galal and his co-pilots to change course from Cairo and fly towards Libya instead, while at the same time Chakore announced "This is a hijack" over the cabin intercom and began separating the passengers by nationality. Arabs, most of whom were Egyptian or Palestinian, went to the back of the plane, and Americans, Europeans and Israelis went to the front. After doing this, Chakore started walking up and down the plane collecting passports. When he got to the rear section, he reached an Egyptian man, 24-year-old Methad Mustafa Kamal. Kamal reached into his jacket pocket, and as Chakore leaned over to take his passport, what Kamal actually pulled out was his own handgun, shooting Chakore and killing him on the spot. Kamal was an undercover Egyptian sky marshal, a Secret Service agent tasked with defending planes from onboard violence and hijackings, typically posted to high-risk routes. Hearing the 2 shots, the other hijackers rushed down the airplane and started firing their own pistols. The 3 men exchanged a total of 19 rounds in a shootout that severely injured Kamal and 2 flight attendants who were nearby. Bullets punctured the fuselage, causing a rapid depressurization of the aircraft, and masks automatically dropped. Captain Galal immediately descended down from 30,000 feet to a more breathable 14,000, and as Rezaq rushed back to the cockpit, Galal told him the plane was damaged and losing fuel, and there was no chance they could make it to Libya. The hijacker agreed, and the plane was diverted a second time to Luha Airport in Malta. Despite the fact that the aircraft was dangerously low on fuel and had 3 seriously wounded passengers aboard, the Maltese authorities refused to allow the plane to land and actually went so far as to switch off all the airport lights in the hope that Captain Galal would just not see Malta and fly on. Unfortunately, Captain Galal is not a moth, and he was able to land pistol to his head, using only his landing lights to illuminate the runway. He taxied to a secluded area of the airport where Maltese security forces surrounded the plane. In a testament to just how unprepared Malta was for this kind of situation, there was no dedicated counter-terrorism task force based on the island, and the local police blockade that surrounded the plane were issued rifles but no ammunition. If a firefight was to break out, the Maltese police would have to make convincing bang 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 noises instead. Shortly after the plane landed, Malta's Prime Minister, Dr. Kamenu Mifsud Bonici, took personal charge of the negotiations from the airport control tower. Immediately, the situation turned very tense as the terrorists demanded fuel so they could fly on to Libya, but Bonici stuck fast to his government's policy of refusing to refuel any hijacked aircraft until all hostages had been released. The terrorists were backed into a corner. There was one promising development when negotiators convinced the hijackers to allow 11 women off the plane using a mobile stairway airport staff brought over. However, things were about to get much worse for the remaining hostages. After Kamal had shot the lead hijacker to death, Rezaq had taken de facto command of the aircraft, which was an unfortunate thing because he was quite an unhinged man, and having been refused fuel, he told Prime Minister Benici that he would kill a passenger every 15 minutes until his demands were met. The situation had begun rapidly spiraling out of control. Benici was in a difficult position because although he had received offers of anti-hijack forces from the United States, UK and France, he was concerned not only with resolving the situation safely, but not risking sparking a conflict with nearby Libya, only 20 minutes flight away, by inviting NATO troops into Malta. He was in a bit of a rock and a hard place situation, however, because with US and Israeli citizens aboard the plane, there was a chance that either country might simply commandeer the situation by landing in Malta without permission and assuming control, and a loss of sovereignty like that would have embarrassed Benici and the government. Malta's socialist and internationally neutral government wanted to handle the situation with a light touch, however, that was just not destined to happen. Back on the plane, a flight attendant called a 24-year-old Israeli woman named Tamar Artzi to the front of the plane. Believing she might be released, she went forward without protest. What she was unaware of, however, was negotiators had told Rezaq that if he attempted to leave Malta, American jets stationed at a nearby Air Force base in Italy would shoot him down. This enraged Rezaq, who had decided he had waited long enough and he was about to start shooting hostages. The front passenger door to the plane was opened and Artzi was shot point blank in the back of the head, and the door was closed immediately behind her. However, this actually worked to her advantage. The shot hadn't fatally injured her, so Artzi slowly crawled down the stairs, where, unsure of where she should go next, she lay down on the tarmac. The second victim was her friend and the other Israeli passenger on board, Nitzan Mendelsohn, a 23-year-old woman who Rezaq grabbed by the hair and shot before being tossed down the stairs. Still down on the tarmac, Artzi tried to hide underneath the stairs, but after seeing her move, Rezaq leaned over the railing and shot her again, hitting her in the lower back and hip. She would also survive this second shooting, however. As the day went on, the first American was called out onto the stairway, 28-year-old Patrick Scott Baker. Baker was a bit taller than Rezaq, and as he was about to shoot, Baker jerked his head forward so the bullet only grazed his skull. Rezaq pushed him down the staircase, and Baker played dead for a few minutes before running away. 15 minutes later, a 38-year-old American named Scarlett Marie Rogenkamp, a US Air Force civilian employee, was shot in the back of the head and died instantly. Still playing dead, Artzi watched this all play out and saw Baker's successful escape, so she decided to do the same. She first crawled to her friend and found her alive but unconscious. Initially wanting to drag Mendelsohn with her, Artzi realized her body was far too heavy, so she crawled towards the back of the plane where there were no windows, and then walked away in the darkness until she got picked up at the police cordon and taken to hospital. Mendelsohn was later pronounced brain dead about a week after the hijacking. In the early morning hours of November 24th, the final victim and third American passenger, 30-year-old Jackie Nink Flug, was shot and gravely wounded. She, Rogenkamp and Mendelsohn were all seen lying at the bottom of the stairs, presumed dead. Negotiations did continue, however, and those injured, including Kamal, were able to be removed. However, Kamal was shot a second time, again by Rezaq, as he was removed from the plane, in vengeance for killing Chakore. He would also survive this shot. But then over the radio came a message that changed the situation entirely. During one of the brief times Rezaq left the cockpit, Captain Galal secretly pleaded over his cockpit radio, "Please do something, they're going to kill us all." And hearing this, Prime Minister Benici finally decided to act. Over in nearby Egypt, President Hosni Mubarak had been monitoring the crisis very closely. Just a few weeks earlier, he had been criticized for a slow and disorganized response to the Akil Lauro cruise ship hijacking, where members of the Palestine Liberation Front took over 100 passengers and crew hostage, so this time he was determined to get ahead of the incident. In the early morning hours of November 24th, he had sent a team of 80 commandos from Egypt's elite counter-terrorism unit 777 to Luha Airport, parked far enough away that the terrorists wouldn't see them. The Egyptian and US ambassadors to Malta had put some pressure on Benici, who finally agreed to allow the commandos to attempt a rescue operation after some assurance that they had been trained by the United States Delta Force, a special operations unit that, among its specialities, handles complex and dangerous hostage rescue missions and is widely regarded as the best at what they do. The commandos were accompanied by 4 US Army officers who, together with Major General Kamal Attia, the commander of the Egyptian forces, drew up a plan to attack the plane doors by dressing some commandos as caterers, who would wedge the catering carts in the plane's entryway under the guise of providing food for the passengers and hijackers, and then a team would storm the cabin. Hostage rescue teams have a variety of methods to gain forcible entry into an enclosed space. Explosives are widely regarded as the most coolestest, however they have a known tendency to cause fire. 5 years earlier, the British SAS were famously pictured on the balcony of the Iranian embassy in central London. They used explosives to blast their way into the third floor windows and experienced some difficulty when the curtains caused fire, resulting in one of the most well-known images of the highly secretive regiment. In this case, aside from one soldier getting a bit singed by the flames, there was no major concern. No doubt, however, Prime Minister Benici was feeling some concern, however, when standing in the air traffic control tower at Luha Airport at about 7:15 p.m. local time, 90 minutes prior to the agreed start time for the Egyptian commandos to begin their raid. He saw 3 teams of 6 Egyptian commandos moving in on the plane and fixing powerful 2-kilogram Semtex charges to the front and rear passenger doors and the lower baggage compartment access door. And a moment later, he very much had the right to be concerned. The Semtex charges blasted open the 3 doorways and the plane immediately filled with toxic smoke. The explosion on the baggage hold doors had ignited various components of the plane, including plastics and the baggage itself. The electrics were damaged and the lights immediately went out on board the plane, and it was plunged into complete darkness, which meant that panic quickly ensued. The hijackers threw a grenade down into the baggage hold, blowing the leg off one of the Egyptian commandos, as the 2 cabin teams moved in, quickly shooting and killing Said. The situation had descended into complete chaos as passengers desperately scrambled to escape the suffocating smoke. Some had managed to force open emergency exits and were escaping down the side of the aircraft. In the cockpit, Captain Galal saw Rezaq was distracted while priming a grenade, so he took the opportunity to bonk him over the head with the cabin's fire axe before escaping out of the cockpit window and jumping down to the ground. Rezaq was then shot by the commandos, suffering a collapsed lung. Even with all the hijackers incapacitated, the passengers were still not safe. Egyptian commandos who surrounded the aircraft couldn't tell who was hijacker or passenger, so they made the questionable decision to just open fire on everyone, killing many who had made it out. Of the 81 remaining passengers aboard, 51 were killed either by suffocation or shot, including all 9 children who had remained aboard. In the morning light, the burned out carcass of EgyptAir Flight 648 sat surrounded in a scene of blood and carnage. Incredibly, Rezaq, after being shot by the commandos, had survived and hid among the injured passengers. The commandos failed to realise this, and authorities were only alerted when passengers alerted staff at the nearby hospital where he was recovering. It probably didn't work wonders for Artsy when, recovering in her hospital bed, she looked over to the left and noticed the man who had attempted to execute her was sitting unguarded in a hospital bed next to her. Instead of letting the Maltese police handle the situation, the Egyptian commandos were so embarrassed that they effectively raided the hospital, literally interrupting staff performing life-saving work on passengers in order to find and arrest Rezaq, who was in surgery to treat his collapsed lung. The situation got so bad and the rescue had been so badly botched that the Maltese police actually detained the Egyptian commandos for a short period before they had to be released to prevent an international incident. Rezaq was charged in Malta, but as it had no specific anti-terror legislation at the time, he was only charged for homicide, attempted murder, and a series of related offences and sentenced to 25 years in prison. However, in a move that shocked many around the world, he was paroled after just 7 years, and the Maltese government refused to extradite him to the United States because local laws strictly prohibited trying a person twice in any jurisdiction for the same series of events in a kind of double jeopardy law. And as you can probably imagine, the United States was perhaps a little bit annoyed that Malta had firstly refused the offer of a US anti-terrorist team with listening devices, and then refused to hand over a man who had executed US citizens after effectively giving him a slap on the wrist. Rezaq had left Malta and was travelling to Nigeria, where Nigerian authorities detained him and quickly handed him over to the United States, who quite eagerly prosecuted him and sentenced Rezaq to life in prison, where he's now serving with no possibility of parole. Politically, the event strained relations between the United States, Egypt and Malta, but didn't really lead to any major crisis. Locally, Prime Minister Benici's reputation definitely suffered, and the disaster didn't exactly repair the Egyptian President Mubarak's reputation as a poor crisis manager during hijackings. Unofficially, many pointed the finger at Gaddafi's Libyan regime for sponsoring the hijacking, but no real proof has ever been made public. It's more the fact that the terrorists were so eager to get there, and some communications they had with the Libyan ambassador that kind of point to this theory. The most long-lasting impacts were in airline safety, where the International Civil Aviation Organization recommended posting more armed sky marshals to higher risk routes, and that airports, especially the Athens International Airport, overhaul their security procedures. Returning back to Jackie Flug, the fifth victim to be shot, after the raid she was taken to hospital, and despite significant and extensive brain injury that required multiple years of treatment and rehabilitation, she made a recovery, had a son, and wrote about her experience in a 2001 book called Miles to Go Before I Sleep. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and be sure to like and subscribe before leaving. Thanks a lot and goodbye.